When we talk about the Great Replacement theory and what some people call the white genocide, we often think about mass migration and that being the cause of it all. But what if it started much, much earlier and it was actually started with increasing house prices? This is a graph that shows the house prices over the last 70 years. It started with about 2 times the yearly salary of an average worker, and now it's about 8 times the yearly salary of an average worker. It became more and more necessary for women to go out in the workforce and also contribute to the family economy. And everyone can, of course, draw their own conclusions about this, but I would say that this is probably a real cause for the lowering of the fertility rates in the whole of Western Europe and the Western civilization, so to say. So, and now many nationalists would also point out that there has been some cultural shifts also, like we had feminism, etc. But I would suspect that a lot of the things that happen culturally can actually be explained by rationalizations, because people want to protect their ego. They don't want to admit that they are victim of something. So imagine a woman that can no longer afford to be a stay-at-home mom, because she has to go out and work and earn money to support the family. Of course, she will probably not say that we are poor, so this is why I have to do it. So, and I think it's very likely that maybe she instead would adopt a kind of feminist attitude, like, I do this because I'm a strong woman, I'm an independent woman, etc. So I would guess that a lot of the culture we have regarding feminism, etc., is actually downstream from economics, and that as it became more and more difficult for a man to fully support his family, we got an increase in feminism. So what happened in the West? It was essentially the ideology of neoliberalism that took hold in the West. And this was the idea of, and also libertarianism, the idea that greed is good, and if everyone is just selfish, the market will sort everything out. If I just try to make as much money as possible, then everything will sort itself out. But of course, we can clearly see that from a nationalistic perspective, there can always be there can be like conflicts between your own will for profit and what is best for the nation. Like, for example, if a rich factory owner owns a factory, he could keep that factory within the nation or within the country and support his local community, but he could also maybe move the factory offshore to some country that has workers that can work much more cheap, so he can make more profit. So we can see that there is a kind of inherent conflict between what is best for the nation and what could be best for any individual that just seeks to benefit themselves. And also, before the 1979, etc., the deregulations that came with Reagan and Thatcher, etc., there were much more restrictions when it came to movement of capital. It was much more difficult. You needed essentially permission to move capital out from your country. And that was scrapped because England wanted to become a hub for international investments. So they tore apart all of those regulations and made the global economy possible. But from a nationalistic perspective, if we want to think of being loyal to a people, if the politicians want to be loyal to the people of the nation, maybe there's a conflict of interest here. I mean, what happened with Thatcher and in England, for example, is that they essentially destroyed the industries of England by all these reforms. They had steel industries in England, they had coal industries, etc., and those were essentially destroyed in the process because they prioritized the value of the British pound and etc. So what I'm trying to get at here is maybe there has been a kind of betrayal in this, that the neoliberalists and the capitalists have maybe done things that weren't in the best interest of the nation. And Elon Musk just recently became a trillionaire. So what does that mean for the future? Gary Stevenson, the English trader that is trying to bring attention to the problem with rising inequality, he has kind of explained that this is a kind of snowballing effect, because the rich people, when they earn money, they don't do it like us through salary. They just own assets that increase in value. So they just, and if they don't sell, they don't have to tax anything either. So, and there's all kinds of technical ways that they can increase the value of their shares without even having to tax. Like, for example, they can do buybacks. The company buys stocks of itself and then maculates those, and that makes all the stocks of all shareholders become more valuable. And if the shareholders want to consume something, they don't even need to take a salary, they just take a loan, and then they use that loan for consumption, and they use the stock shares they have as security for that loan. So they can just consume, and they just have to pay a small interest on that loan, but essentially they don't have to pay any tax. So, and also they can move profits to different tax havens. It's actually fairly easy to if you have one company in one country and another company in the country where you're operating, you can just have it so that you make up some fictional product that the shell company sells to your operating company, and that way you can move profits to any country offshore, and this is what the rich elite also have done. But again, from a nationalistic perspective, isn't this a kind of betrayal actually? I mean, if you like bloodletting the assets from a country and move them out from the nation, from the country, isn't that some kind of betrayal? I mean, nationalists always talk about physical borders. We want to prevent migrants from entering into our country without proper vetting, without proper permission, etc. But what about capital flights? I mean, if rich people can take any amount of profits that comes from a country and just move it to UAE and live there in luxury, isn't that a kind of also problematic thing from a nationalistic perspective? And now we are also in a situation where if you look at the many leaders of the national movement, like Nigel Farage, Rupert Lowe, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, etc., they are essentially billionaires, or at least very rich people that have these, that are working towards the interest of the rich. And I think that is something we, like, for the nationalistic movements of Europe, for example, I think that is something quite problematic that we need to consider more and more as we go forward. Because even if, assume we get Rupert Lowe elected, yeah, he says some very, he's very bold when it comes to remigration, for example, and we might like that. But on the other hand, if he also continues the same policies, continues with essentially no tax for the ultra rich, what will happen then? We will just continue have more and more difficulties for young families to buy a home, more and more ever decreasing fertility rates, and we still have the same problem as before. So what is the solution I'm proposing here? Yeah, I'm suggesting that nationalists in Europe and in the Western world needs to also not only consider the problem with migration, we also need to consider the problem with low fertility rates. And to properly address that problem, we have to look at wealth inequality, and we have to do something about it. Because right now, all the wealth of the nations are getting sucked up in a black hole of straight into the hands of the ultra wealthy that are just becoming astronomically wealthy by the day. And it will lead to poverty, it will lead to problems for families to find a home, it will lead to all kinds of problems. And we cannot solve the problems of our civilization by only stopping migration and some remigration. We have to look at the economic underlying problems that may have caused it all in a way. And it's down to demanding change from politicians. And I think the slogan of Gary Stevenson's is pretty good, like tax wealth, not wages. And I think that's exactly what we need to do, because the highest earners, they don't even have a wage. They just sit on assets that increase in value, and that is something we have to. And then they just buy more and more assets as they get dividends, etc. So that is something we have to do something about. And do you think I'm right in this, or do you think I'm wrong? Leave a comment below and say what you think. And if you want, leave a like and subscribe. Thanks and bye bye.